All right, this video is about tuning a carburetor on a two-stroke machine. That means a chainsaw, most weed whackers, leaf blowers, things like that. We're not going to be covering four-stroke carburetors like you'd find on a lawnmower or a generator or a pressure washer, just two strokes. We're going to talk about stoichiometric ratio, rich versus lean, the effects of both. We're going to talk about what these screws do. And then in the end, we're going to go out and tune that weed whacker as a demonstration. So this is going to be part theory, part practice and application. So if that sounds interesting to you, stick around. If not, see you later. No problem. Okay. So when we talk about engines, often we talk about what's called running rich and running lean. What does that mean? So basically, this is a two-stroke engine. Every time the piston comes up to the top, the spark plug fires, and you get what many call a mini explosion. It's not technically an explosion, but we're going to call it an explosion. And that explosion only takes place if you have two things, fuel and oxygen. And you have to have the right amount. So if you've ever had a campfire and it's been dying and you blow into the campfire with your lungs and it builds back up, that's because it was missing oxygen. And so you have to have the right ratio of fuel to air. And that ratio is 1 part fuel to 14.7 parts air. So that's what we call the stoichiometric ratio. It's basically 15 to 1. It could be as low as 14 to 1, as high as 15.5 to 1, but it basically has to be in there. If you start having too much fuel to air, we call that rich. So let's say like 13 parts air to 1 part fuel. That would be rich. And if you start having too much air, let's say 20 parts air to 1 part fuel, that's what we call lean. When an engine starts running rich, it often starts blowing out black smoke and it begins to start blackening the spark plug. I don't have a good example here, but if this looks all sooty like a campfire or a chimney, then it's running rich. And if it's running too lean, then the spark plug will start getting super white and the temperatures inside the combustion chamber start going really high and you can start melting components. The government likes you to run engines lean because that means you're polluting less. The downside is the engines won't last as long because they're not being cooled as properly and lubricated as properly. And so I tell customers to run their engines at 40 to 1 oil mixture. Okay, so that's a little bit about rich and lean. Now, we achieve richness and leanness via the carburetor. The carburetor's job is very simple. It is to mix gasoline and air together at the right ratio, which is almost obvious perhaps after what I've just said. So air comes in through here, fuel comes up into these ports, and the carburetor's job is to mix them properly and get them all mixed up together. There are generally 3 screws on a carburetor. Not always, but generally. I've never seen 4 screws, at least not on one of these little guys. But sometimes you don't have all 3 screws. So the first screw is this one here. This is the one that you should feel most comfortable adjusting. And it's the one that adjusts the idle speed. So as you screw this in and out, you are changing the resting position of this. And this is the throttle. So when you pull the trigger, when you pull the trigger on a machine, what you're doing to the carburetor is this. And this screw just changes the position that this comes to rest at. In other words, your idle position. So if you were to crank this down, it would be the same as if you were to permanently be holding the trigger on a machine. And if you pull this too far back, then you're not pulling the trigger enough and the machine will stall because it doesn't want to try and run at 200 RPM or something like that. So this one, you really don't need to adjust very often. Then when you flip the carburetor around, you have these other 2 screws. And I'm going to show you what they do. They are needles, what we call needles. So it looks like that. And this would be what we call the male component. There's a female component inside of there. Basically, it's a seat, basically a precise hole against which this seals. And as you screw this in, it seals more, and as you screw it out, it seals less. Now, just like a garden hose, the more you loosen one of these screws, the more liquid you get. So on a garden hose, you loosen it, you get more water. On these, you loosen it, you get more fuel. So loosening is always richening, and tightening is always leaning, okay? You're leaning it out. Now, there's 2, because we have an adjustment when the machine is idling and there's no trigger action, and we have an adjustment when the machine is at partial throttle or wide open throttle. Now, there's an easy way to remember which one is which. and that is whichever screw is closest to the engine and furthest from the air filter is your idle screw. Correspondingly, whichever screw is furthest from the engine and closest to the air filter is your off idle or wide open throttle screw. And it's very easy to understand why that is always the case if you understand the construction of this carburetor. So if I turn this around now, you can see that the throttle plate is closed. And if I open this, you may be able to see that right in there is a little tiny hole. Oh, it's right there. It looks like a little rust spot. This throttle plate is not completely covering up that hole. That tiny little hole is actually exposed to the engine side of the carburetor, which would be over here. And so the fuel that runs via this valve comes out that little hole. You can also see a second hole up there. Actually, that one shows up much better. So if you look right there at the end of my screwdriver, you can see a little hole. And that's the one that is actually controlled by this. That's an even better example. So as I loosen this, I let more I let more fuel out of that hole. And that's the hole that is delivering fuel and air, because the throttle plate also has a little hole, to the engine while idling. Once I go off idle, or wide open throttle, all of the fuel actually begins to flow through that check valve right there, which is connected to this valve. Okay, so if you understand what I just said, hopefully it was clear, then it makes sense why the one closest to the engine is always on the engine side of the throttle plate, and that's that little hole right there. Okay, so we've established that there's two screws. Their purpose is in goes leaner, out goes richer. The next thing that might be helpful to know if you've messed with these and you have no idea where they used to be is you need to know that most of the time the way we adjust these is that we basically you tighten them all the way down, but do it loosely. Don't crank on this thing or you'll destroy the aluminum seat inside. So you crank them down, and I just use just like 2 fingers, just lightly, okay, till it's kind of firm, and then you back it off 1 revolution. So get a part of the screwdriver that you can see, like Ramsey Electric, and move it back 1. 1 to 1.5 is a good starting point for almost all machines out there. I've never seen a machine that starts at a 1/4 turn. I've never seen a machine that starts at 3 turns. So 1, 1.5 is a good starting point. So if you've messed with these and you're not sure where to put them, then bottom them out and come back out 1. Now, many of the manufacturers don't want you adjusting these. So they'll use special fasteners that you probably don't have screwdrivers for at your house. That's why you can buy carburetor adjustment tools like these, and they have special ends specifically for 2-stroke carburetors. Some manufacturers achieve a limitation by adding these plastic barrels, and these plastic barrels sometimes have stops inside of them. I don't actually think I have an example here to show you, but they have stops so that you can't go too far left and you can't go too far right. So they allow you to move them, but only within a certain window. And you have to basically tear these black things off of the carburetor in order to make bigger adjustments. Okay, so let's just go through a couple of the styles. So this one here, you see there's no screws over here. There's only 1 screw over here. So this is not a very adjustable carburetor. Here you have 2 screws. I already took one out for something. Here you have the 2. Here you have 2 little ones. You see it says H and high. That's high and low, high RPM, low RPM. Just what we were talking about. Here you have the 2. Here you have the 2 little ones, again, H and L. Here you have the 2. It also says L over here and H over here. Here you have the 2. Here you have the 2. Here you have the 2. And here you just have the 1 again. So these are just a few examples of what you may find on your actual machine. All right, when you actually go to adjust one of these carburetors, you want to make small movements, okay? You don't want to be cranking it from 1 revolution to 9 and then 6. You're going to make small movements. Small movements, just a half a turn in either direction is enough to make a machine run good or bad. That's the first thing to know. Second thing to know is you need the machine warmed up and hot. You need the machine loaded. What do I mean by loaded? Well, if it's a chainsaw, the bar and the chain need to be on it. If it's a weed whacker, the string needs to be out. If it's a leaf blower, the attachments need to be on. You don't want to try and tune an unloaded engine because in the end, you're going to be using the machine with a load, okay? So yeah, it has to be warm, has to be fully assembled, air filter has to be on, all those kinds of things. And then you're going to make small adjustments. And what you're going to do, generally, we're going to start with the idle side. Excuse me, the idle side is here. So what you're going to find, get a screwdriver with some sort of marking on it so you know which way is up, and try and start there. You're going to go to the right 1/4 inch, back to where you were, left 1/4 inch, back to where you were. And you're going to find a sweet spot. And what I mean by sweet spot is you're going to find that if I go a half turn in this direction, it runs bad. And if I go a half turn in this direction, it runs bad. So right between those 2 points is a sweet spot. It might only be a 1/4 turn in each direction. But if you find that you can do a 1/4 turn this way and it runs bad, and 2 revolutions before it runs bad in the other direction, then you're not in the middle between the sweet spot. So the sweet spot is kind of like a window with 2 limits, like the gutters at a bowling alley, and you want to be in between the 2. When you're adjusting the idle screw, it should be adjusted so that when you pull the throttle, it immediately ramps up the machine. There shouldn't be a bogging or a hesitation. It should also be able to sit there and idle for 10 minutes and not stall. When it comes to adjusting the wide open throttle screw, or the one that's closest to the air filter, furthest away from the engine, you want to begin to richen it until it begins to 4-stroke. Then you lean it out until the 4-stroking goes away. Here's what I'm on about. And I'm going to show this to you on a machine. This is a difficult concept to understand unless you can hear it. As you richen up the machine, there's so much fuel that it'll actually kind of fire twice. And so the machine, when the machine is running properly, it'll sound like this, like wah, and you're hearing very, very quick firing. When it begins to 4-stroke, it'll sound like brrr, and you can actually hear it's firing twice as fast. That's what we call 4-stroking. When a 2-stroke machine starts firing twice as fast as it normally does, we call it 4-stroking. And 4-stroking is too rich. Over time, it'll cause carbon buildup and it'll cause the spark plug to foul. So you want to get it to the point where it 4-strokes and then just lean it out a little bit so it doesn't 4-stroke anymore. Okay, and the benefit of doing it that way is that's basically running the machine as rich as it can be run before you start getting problems. Now, you could run that machine even leaner than that, but I don't like to, because the more rich that you run it, the cooler everything inside of the engine runs. And if you look at the back of my cutout here, you can see those big scratches. This machine, well, if it hadn't come to me to be used as an illustration, this machine would be in the trash. And so while we don't want to pollute the environment unnecessarily with rich running engines, we also don't want to pollute the earth with a bunch of machines in the landfill because they burned up. So you don't want to run too rich, you don't want to run too lean. So we're going to go out to a machine now. I'm gonna it was running like 15 minutes ago, so it's not totally cold, but it's not totally warm. So I'm going to start it up, I'm going to get it warmed up, and then I'm going to walk you through these procedures. The only problem is I can't really talk to you that well without shutting the machine off over and over again. So I'm going to just tell you now what I'm going to do. I'm going to go out to the machine, I'm going to start it up, get it hot, and then I'm going to show you how you can adjust the idle, too rich, too lean, just right. Then I'm going to go wide open throttle, and I'm going to show you 4-stroking, 2-stroking, 4-stroking, and I'm going to go like this, 4-stroking, 2-stroking, so you can hear it. It's one of those things, it's very hard to describe to someone over the phone or in a document, but when you hear it, it's obvious. So I'm going to make it very obvious for you, and then I'm going to show you the sweet spot, and then we'll be done. So let's go ahead and do that. I'm going to throw on some earphones. For reference, this is a Stihl FS55 RC weed whacker. Choke it. right, so this machine should be hot now. I'm now going to show how I adjust the idle. Again, the idle is the one closest to the engine over here, furthest from the air filter over here. Oop. Okay, I'm going to begin to lean out the engine, so I'm tightening the screw. You can see here my marking is up. Let me bring you in. Sorry, let me bring you in closer. Okay. So I'm going to have this marking facing the sky. That's my starting point. And I'm going to tighten it and lean it out first. The engine may die, or at least it'll start running more poorly. Then I'm going to come back the other way, and then I'm going to find the happy medium. So I can hear it's running better now, but now it stalls. So I tightened it 1 revolution, and it stalled. So that's obviously too lean. I'm going to bring it back to where it was. Okay, so now I loosened it 1/2 revolution and it stalled. Okay, so I'm going to bring it back to where it was, and I'm going to go a little bit leaner now, because I noticed as I started to go lean, it started to run better. So I was a 1 revolution and 1/2 revolution. So now I'm going to lean it out 1/4 of a revolution. That should be close to the sweet spot, but we're going to test it out. And now my new marking is going to be this Ramsey electric, which is going to be facing out. That's my new baseline. Let's try it out. All right, from here, I'm going to pull the throttle, see if it ramps up properly. Okay, that was pretty good. So right now I'm just playing with the different positions and I'm seeing how fast it ramps up when I pull the trigger. Okay, so I'm pretty happy with that. Now I'm going to increase the idle speed. It's a Torx, but I can use a slotted. I'm going to increase the idle speed up until the point when this thing starts moving on its own. We don't want to move it, it's moving on its own, but we want it to be just beneath that point. So let's do that. Okay, so now, on its own, it's spinning. We don't want that. So now that I've increased the idle speed, I'm now going to go back and readjust my idle screw because it's in a slightly different location, and I'm going to go for the best throttle response. Too rich. Okay, I'm happy with that. Now we're going to do the wide open throttle screw. So here's what we're gonna do. I'm gonna start it. I'm gonna run it at wide open throttle for 20 seconds. Then I'm going to do big movements to show you the difference between two-stroking and four-stroking. And then after I do that 5 times so that it's really clear for you the difference, I'm going to do the final tuning, which will be taking it to the four-stroking spot and then leaning it out just a little bit. Microphone is still on. Okay, so hopefully, although a little repetitive, it's very clear what a four-stroking machine looks like and what a two-stroking machine looks like. And then what I did at the very end is I loosened it until it four-stroked, and then I went about a quarter turn back and just let it run for 10 seconds. I wanted to make sure there was no more four-stroking. The last thing I want to add is that there is one other way to tune an engine, and it's a perfectly acceptable way, but it's not the way I taught today. And I'm only mentioning this so that if you hear it, you don't wonder, who's right, who's wrong. Some people will teach that you richen it until it four strokes, just barely four strokes, with no interaction from the head. And then, specifically with a chainsaw, then once you start cutting into the wood with a chainsaw or you start whipping the ground with this, the four stroking goes away. And that's true. And that's how I tune chainsaws. Chainsaws are a little bit more high performance than weed whackers. So on a chainsaw, when the chain is not engaged into the wood, my engines will four stroke a little bit. And then as soon as you put the teeth or the cutter from the chainsaw chain into the wood, the four stroking clears up instantly. That is a totally acceptable way to do it. It's how I do it as well, but it wasn't the way I wanted to teach today because most people watching this video probably aren't tuning a chainsaw, and the benefit between those two methods is very, very, very small, and so it just complicates things. So if you've heard of that method or you're wondering what I think of that method's great, it's fine, but it's not what I wanted to teach today. What I taught today gets you about 98% of the way there, and most people don't need that last little improvement unless you're a pro. So, all right, folks, I hope that was helpful. I hope that clarifies a lot of the questions about carburetor tuning that I've been getting, and have a great day.